Welcome, seekers of the unexplained, to Paranormal M, your gateway to the supernatural. Subscribe now and enable notifications to join us on our quest for the truth beyond the mysteries of the universe. Prepare to be amazed. I think my sister's house is haunted. For context, I'm a 16-year-old female living with my sister, 23-year-old female, and nieces, 4 and 2, both female. For this, I'll call my sister Jennifer. Now, the examples of this haunted house, well, flat. We live in a top-floor flat with 2 bedrooms, 1 living room, 1 bathroom, and 1 kitchen. It's quite small, so there's nowhere for a human to be hidden, so it can't be that. Never mind trying to get in, but anyways, I'll list the examples I have from the 5 months of living here. Jennifer was cooking dinner for us all. She looked away to grab something for not even 30 seconds. Looks back and the pan she was cooking in had moved to a different hob that wasn't on. She wasn't using that one and it was vigorously shaking. She then put everything down, left the kitchen, and came to the living room and explained the story very, obviously shocked. This was the first thing I had heard about anything paranormal in the house. Sometimes when she's taking my niece to school, I'll still be getting ready as she leaves before me. So I'll be alone in the house. I will hear footsteps in the hallway and toilet flushes, doors opening and closing. These are fire doors, so open windows can't really open them. I've witnessed my room door opening a couple of times on its own. No one in the house. Taps running. Talking when no one's there. And for context again, niece is 2, just turned 2. So there's balloons. And a balloon is like, kind of thing with craft tissue tassels in the living room. They're still all up as the kids like to play with the balloons, and today I was sat in the living room by myself. The balloons start moving and making noise. I assume it's the cat going through the balloons as there's loads of them. 90, not including the archway. I hope you mean balloons. So I say her name, but it doesn't stop, and I get up, and as I walk over, the balloons drop from behind a Christmas tree as I hadn't seen them, floating. I'm obviously shocked, and these are regular balloons, not helium. So I realize it's not the cat. But they had stopped moving, so I just sit back down after about a minute, and the balloons start moving again. The tassels on the archway start pulling. So I got out my phone to record because I couldn't believe what was going on. As soon as I do, everything stops for good. I explained what had happened to my sister and she pretty much just says, "Stuff like that happens all the time. It's been going on for 2 years. Someone please explain, is this a ghost or what?" Some weird experiences I've had. So I'm not that old, but I've had a few odd occurrences happen to me over the years. I have no clue what to make of them. The first time I felt something weird, it was when I visited some friends of my grandfather. We went to this old house in a town about an hour away from where I live. When we sat in our living room, it felt like I was buried underground. Like the air around me was solid. Brought it up later that day, but my grandfather said he felt nothing weird. A few years later, I sat around a campfire on a school camping trip. The adults were obviously telling us scary stories to freak us out. That was until my teacher took a picture of us. Above our heads sat a perfectly spherical thing that was pure white. It was definitely not the moon or something else. It looked so clear and striking compared to what was around it. Wish I had the picture. I've heard voices sometimes. They've been only one word for like a breath close by or something. Always just assumed it was my imagination. But a few months ago, I'm not so sure now. First time I heard a knock at my door, and it sounded like the type of knock my mother would do to grab my attention. Stood up to check who knocked, just to realize that everyone in my house was just too far away from my door to have knocked. A few weeks later, I'm in class listening to an accounting lecture. And while there, I suddenly hear a girl's voice say, "Can I have?" It was right next to me. The sentence also felt incomplete. Checked around me to see if anybody wanted something, just to realize that all the girls were sitting in front of me. Felt confused and eventually just went on with my work. These experiences are pretty much unrelated to each other, but maybe somebody can help me understand what happened. REM pod ghost hunting device. So after many months of watching different ghost hunting channels, I decided to purchase an REM pod. If you aren't familiar with what this device does, it basically measures both EMF and temperature changes in the environment. It has different sensitivity settings, and those are measured by a metal antenna sticking out of the device. From me messing with it, it seems like even the most sensitive setting, the EMF field will not be set off unless you're within 5 inches of it. I know what the different tones it makes represent, and the strength of contact is represented by different colored LEDs. Now for the weird part. I've been able to manipulate the REM pod on my own while being 6 feet away from it by dropping any and all said barriers. I imagine in my current mind's eye a giant white force field made of light that surrounds my home. I imagine it melting away till it's gone, and it sets the REM pod off. Usually the red and purple mini LEDs and a large green LED all at the same time go off and fluctuate for a good 5 to 10 seconds. I've been able to repeat this exercise 3 times in a row, 2 different times. One of which I demonstrated in a Discord call. He said he recorded it all. I don't know if he did, but it actually, well, or even if anybody cares enough, I'm sure I can repeat it again. Or to see if he did actually record it. Makes me wonder how much of these ghost investigations are being influenced by the investigators themselves, though. My only ghost experience. Bear with me, this may not be the most entertaining story, but I can assure you, it is my real experience. And if anybody else has experienced anything similar, please tell me. Now that that's out of the way, on with the story. When I was in high school, I decided to take a college course over the summer at a college in New York State. It was for early college credits. I'm an art student, so I wanted to get some of my early art credits out of the way. Our dorm buildings were these old-looking houses with 3 floors. I was placed on the 2nd floor with 2 other students, and our RA was sharing a room. And for context, I'm a trans person, so they put all the trans people in one dorm. I'd noticed something was off when I opened the closet at the end of the hallway. There was a line of salt along it. My room was right next to that closet and had a mirror in it. I never liked mirrors. I've always believed in ghosts, but never thought I'd experience one. Later that day, we asked our RA about the salt line. He told us that the building was haunted. He said that he had been here a week before we arrived to repair, had heard the closet door opening and somebody walking down the hallway every night. So, his solution was to put a salt line down in the closet. He also took it a step further and wrote protection symbols on the back of our name tags that were stuck to the door. I believe these symbols were pagan, but don't quote me on that. It pretty much roughly translated to telling the ghosts to get out and, well, basically that it doesn't belong there. He thought he was just messing with us because we were kids. It was our first college experience, so we shrugged it off. That night I was lying in bed. I had the bottom bunk. I stared out into the dark. That's when I saw 2 red glowing circles that seemed to be in between the mirror and the window outside. It scared me a little bit, but I decided to just go to sleep trying to rationalize that it had possibly been a light from outside. The next morning I went to check out the window. There were only trees. There wasn't a close enough house nearby to the neighbors, and though there was a road where you could hear the cars, it wasn't close enough to shine a light in. That same day, my other roommate mentioned the blinds moving. Despite it being 90 degrees in the middle of the summer, no wind and our fans were off, the blinds moved on their own. Fast forward to Wednesday. The whole class took a trip down to a haunted theater for a tour. I thought this was so cool. I recorded every room and everything the guide said on the tour. I've always been interested in this sort of thing and was hoping I'd catch a ghost on camera. I didn't. That night I was uploading all the videos into a Windows Movie Maker file. I planned on uploading the whole thing unwatched and unedited to see if anybody would see anything. This took me hours. I was still doing it once 2:30 a.m. rolled around. While I was uploading the videos into the file, I heard what sounded like a bus stopping outside and leaving. It was that sort of hiss that a bus makes when it stops. Air brakes. I thought nothing of it, as you often heard cars all night, but the sound returned. The sound got louder and louder to a point where I felt like something was wrong. Wasn't really sure what else could make this loud hiss sound. I thought since the house was old, maybe it was like a gas leak or something. Maybe I should alert my RA. My glasses were just out of reach, so I had to get off my bed to get them. The second my feet hit the floor, the hissing stopped, and I felt this pressure and numb feeling, kind of like when your foot falls asleep but without the pain. Again, the back of my legs. This scared the crap out of me. Hopped back in bed until I had the courage to wake up my roommate. I crawled in bed with her and began feeling the same pressure and numbness on my lower back. I laid there terrified until about 4 a.m. when the pressure stopped. I was finally able to crawl back into my bed and go to sleep. And from that point on, I was absolutely terrified of being alone. Got to the point where my RA pulled me aside and told me to get over it because one day I'll be alone. Thanks for fucking with my abandonment issues, prick. On the 3rd week, it seemed like I would end up by myself, so I convinced the RAs to allow me to room with one of the girls upstairs. They fought me on this because they insisted that if I roomed with the girl, they wouldn't be keeping boys and girls separate, and they wanted to respect her gender but keep us separate from the cis boys. It was weird. From that point on, I had 0 issues because, though we knew the house was haunted, the girl I roomed with had been raised to respect spirits. Would often ask before entering the room and thank the spirits for allowing them into the space. This is a behavior that I adopted as well, and it was much more peaceful in our room. My first ghost sightings are even scarier than I first thought. The first sighting. This is not really a sighting, but an experience, which is in the corner of our dining room. It's like an old wooden cabinet that we have things like glasses and memories inside. One early morning, we're packing to go on holiday. We opened the cabinet for some reason, and a glass flew out at us. There were no glasses at the edge. The next one with the cabinet is where we were having dinner a couple of weeks later. The largest elephant ornament was 1 foot away from falling off the top. We thought it was due to somebody jumping, but it was the largest and heaviest thing on there. You could see the skid marks on the dust after you lifted the elephant up, meaning something had moved it. The second and scariest sighting. Same house. Nothing different. My parents were on holiday and my sister was in bed. Just me downstairs. I looked at my second monitor. I was playing on my PC, and in the corner of my eye, I saw a dark, tall figure walk from the cabinet to the kitchen. Me, being an idiot, told my friend, 1 sec. Ran to the kitchen and there was nothing. A week later, I told my family and my sister responded, "Yeah, I've seen it a couple of times." My dad said once that he was in the living room and he saw as clear as day something walk opposite him and match the description I gave. That was when I hadn't told them what it even looked like. Spooky. My ex-boyfriend's house. I was visiting my ex who lived in a super old house. It had been a hotel, a brothel, a store, and a funeral home in its former life. At this point, it's a home that looks so beautiful if you could only see the beautiful architecture and grand wallpapers they used to be. Instead, the house looks as if it had been forgotten for some time. Dust and cobwebs are visible on every surface, but especially on the deep mahogany carved trim that encircled every room, and sometimes it protruded into elaborate carvings of guardian protectors. It was unnerving to be in this home at any time. The hair on the back of your neck would stand every time you switched rooms, as if you had walked into something that couldn't be seen. That feeling is something you get used to, though. It's a feeling that fades pretty quickly, grows comfortable after a while. This was a feeling that you didn't mind because it didn't trigger any emotion. It was just more of a reminder that some people are unseen. That night, the house was a different story. Not often, but some nights, the house after sunset felt different. It filled with tension. You could feel the hair on your neck stand, but the energy of somebody being there is much different. This feeling causes goosebumps. It's uncomfortable tension filled and chilling. This feeling doesn't fade and sometimes returns from mentions of the stories I encountered. Not lasting as long as before, but definitely there. This night I went over because my boyfriend's parents and siblings had gone out of town. They needed us to dog sit. We hung around the house and watched TV. That night we decided we would travel to the upstairs back hall, just to scare ourselves. The house felt quieter than normal that day. We were worried that we might not see anything in the back hall, like all of the last spirits were on vacation. That night, it changed. Everybody knows this house is haunted, there's no doubt. But as you climb the stairs to the second story, you're met with another level of paranormal. Almost constantly you hear things that don't make sense. You feel that negative tension in the air and you catch things out of the corner of your eye that you just can't find reasoning for. And to add a little bit of extra spice, the upstairs had lost almost all of its electricity several years prior. Instead, they had extension cords running to the 3 main bedrooms. The upstairs is split in 2 parts. One of the parts is at the top of the staircase. It opens to 3 main bedrooms, each with a giant door made of solid wood and sharing the same grand crown molding as the downstairs. Immediately to the left of the staircase was another identical door. This door leads to the hallway. The hallway has a few rooms and a bathroom. Room numbers still grace the front of each door to let hotel guests know which room will be accommodating them from the evening. As the sun went down, we got excited to go exploring, maybe dig up some trouble. Live for the adrenaline of it, maybe get a little spook in. As we went up the stairs, things felt different. Even in the dark, nothing was happening. Just like earlier in the day, the house was quiet. It just felt like there was something in this old house. No goosebumps, no presence of another, no noise. As we turned the knob and opened the door to go back to the hallway, it changed immediately. Suddenly all around us was a presence of darkness and a feeling of terror. We immediately had the same thought. No. Closed the door and almost immediately the air cleared of the terrible feeling that it had presented just moments earlier. Since the house felt so calm, we decided to spend some time in my boyfriend's bedroom upstairs. As we lay there watching a movie, the lights flickered. Not uncommon because of the extension cord fire hazard that ran from the living room and the upstairs. The flicker brought with it that horrible presence that we had felt opening the back hallway door, rushing back at us. As we glanced at each other in terror, the lights flickered one more and a loud crash came from outside the door, and repetitive beats like a toddler running pounded lightly in the hallway. Only 5 or 6 steps, but incredibly loud. As soon as the pounding footfalls stopped, the air changed to normal again. We sat catching our breath together for what seemed like forever, neither of us saying a word. When we did speak, we decided we should leave for the night. The dog would be fine until morning. Upon opening the door to his bedroom and get out of the house, we heard a crunch. Lifting his shoe, we noticed that my ex had just stepped in broken glass. Upon further inspection, we realized it wasn't just broken glass. It was broken Christmas bulbs. These are special ornaments his mom puts up every year and keeps in special ornament totes with locking lids to prevent breakage. Those totes are behind a closed door, down a hallway and inside a room that also had a closed door away from where they now lay at our feet. We left. How I Met Uncle Bobby. When I was 14 in 1994, my bedroom was in the attic of a 100-year-old house. My 7-year-old sister and parents had bedrooms on the second floor, and the main floor was mostly open with a cute 40s-style kitchen. One day I was in my room when one of the kids visiting the second floor had accidentally made his way up into my room. He was quiet and just looked at me. This happened, pretty often, so I directed him back down the stairs to the second floor. An hour or so later, I walked downstairs to talk to my mom, casually asked where the kids went. She seemed confused and said that my sister wasn't home today and no kids were visiting. I walked up and down the stairs a few times, checked all the closets, and figured the kid must have left. Mom assured me that she'd been sitting between, the only 2 doors in the house, and no kids visited. I was sure I saw a kid, but it would have been hard to sneak around her twice, especially with the loud screen doors. That night before dinner, I'm skimming through the local paper. Every day they would publish anniversaries of local stories from 5, 10, 20, 50, and even 100 years ago. When I got to this story about 50 years ago, it told a story about a kid who died when a bomb got loose from a World War II armory across the street. It accidentally detonated in their kitchen. I look around and I notice how her kitchen is from the 40s. Then I remember how I saw this kid earlier in the day and freaked me out. Was he a ghost kid? Even without the ghost kid, it's a weird story. But what if he was a ghost kid? We moved away from that house, and I always wondered about the ghost kid. So here's where it gets really weird. When I moved in with a roommate 5 years later, we're telling stories back and forth one night. I eventually get around to ghost stories. I tell him about the ghost kid, and he says, "Was it at 44 Front Ave East?" Yeah. He didn't even know me then. This is weird. "That's my Uncle Bobby. He hit it with an ice pick." It's 6 a.m. and I'm bored. Here is a story. This story's been in my head for a while, so it's also been over 5 years since this has happened. I'll try my best to type this out. It was 2015. I was 12 years old. I was in a suburban town in Pennsylvania. I lived on top of a cliff or a hill, and this part comes in later. And my neighbor at the time, we'll call her A, which I will call Anna, was 11, and a grade under me. Now, I was never close to my family, so I never really knew the pain of losing a daily member at this point, but my neighbor had lost her grandmother at this point in time. She spent a couple of days with her family, and once she came home, she was still a mess. I, doing the only thing I knew how to do when people were upset, found her as soon as she came home and hugged her. After this, we hung out and decided that we wanted to hang out all night, because why not? My brother was staying at his friend's house, and that was his coping mechanism, so we took over his bedroom. That was with his permission. He had a queen bed, and so we could share a bed. I'll skip over all the tween girl shit that we did, but it's not important. Where the weird shit is at around 12 a.m. We ended our night watching South Park on our laptop. I'd fall asleep during the last episode, and we were watching, and I finished the episode, Anne fell asleep. I finished the episode and put her laptop on the floor, and just turned over to go to sleep. Now, this is where this gets really hard to explain, so I'm gonna kind of just write what happened in order. 12 a.m. I finished watching South Park, went to sleep. 12:30 a.m. Anne stirs quite hard in bed. 1 or 1:15 a.m. Anne stirs concerningly hard in her sleep to the point where I make sure she's okay and also start to make weird noises. Like a baby tried to learn how to talk for the first time, just couldn't figure out how to make the words. 1:30 a.m. Anne stirs so hard in her sleep that she ends up laying in her head at my feet and her feet at the head, and she's doing a weird mumbled growling thing even louder. Really doesn't sound like her. 2 a.m. She continues stirring and making weird noises. 2:30 a.m. Starts making noises again and stirs more and more. She eventually sat up in bed and sat up completely straight, turning her head out toward the front of the bed. Her shoulders completely relaxed, and she says, "But I didn't mean to," in a tone that makes it sound like she was getting scolded. She lays down while swinging her legs completely straight out and laying down perfectly as if somebody was placing down a doll. I freaking the fuck out. I turned to look to see what she was looking at. When I turned, I saw a figure of a woman that was just pure white. I didn't get a long enough look to be able to make out features, but I saw something. Now, this thing was not in front of a window, a mirror, or any sort of light. The street lamps weren't LEDs at this point, they were actually a yellow color. I also only got to see this figure for about half a second. 2:37 a.m. Yeah, I know, the exact same time. Pack my shit up and I go home. As I'm going home, I feel like I'm being stared at from all corners behind, and in front of me too as I walk on the road. Kept checking behind me. Obviously there was nothing to the eye, but I felt there was. The house I lived in had a concrete slab walkway thing that led up to my front door. And as I'm walking out of this walkway, I hear what sounds like heavy boots walking behind me. I remember pausing and trying to let my brain figure out if it was my steps or something else. As I walk faster, so do the sounds of the steps behind me. Once I got to my door, they stopped. The next day I told my neighbor about this. There's no explanation for this experience. My family, they just tell me and I saw nothing. What I heard was her simply sleep-talking, even though she had no prior experience with it. And also that has her stirring, it was just normal. About weeks after this happened, I spoke about it to Anne again, and her exact sentence bringing it up again was, "Oh yeah, it was my grandma, she visits me in my sleep now." Now that that's kind of explained, let's get back to the feeling of being watched while crossing the road. This is also where the cliff I lived on comes in. Now, if there are people who don't know Pennsylvania is a state of coal, well, there's a lot of coal mining, obviously. After the whole seeing my friend's dead grandma ordeal, we're sitting around the fire talking about why our parents decided to live where we lived. So we simply asked them. And one thing that really sticks out in the conversation is the risk factor of living where we lived. underneath all our houses and old mining tunnels that could collapse at any minute. There's not a lot of information on the story, but I'm pretty sure something happens, and there's an accident or people got sick, but something happened, and it was not good. So that could be the feeling of being watched while walking. Maybe they were just making sure that I got home safe. I've never had an experience like that ever since that moment. I'm now 18 and still can't make sense of the situation, and also no longer talk to Anne. It's like a weird unclosed chapter of my life. We all got one of those. The mystery behind the disappearance of the Jameson family. Made up of 44-year-old Bobby Jameson, his 40-year-old wife, Sherilyn Jameson, and their 6-year-old daughter, Madison, the Jameson family appeared to be living a happy life. They were going through a rough patch. Bobby was suffering from chronic back pain, and his wife, Sherilyn, was bipolar. As she often failed to take her medication, she was going through severe depression. Bobby believed that their house was haunted by spirits that lived on their roof. As a result, Bobby called their pastor Gary on multiple occasions and asked him where he could get special bullets to shoot these spirits. To add on, the Jameson family owned a storage container which was pretty popular in their current neighborhood, as Sherilyn painted creepy wordings on it. Because of this general creepiness about the family, the neighbors avoided them on all possible occasions. Thinking that their house was the reason behind their bad phase in life, the Jameson family decided to move out of their house in Eufaula, Oklahoma, settle down somewhere else. However, the family did not intend to move to another house. Instead, they wanted to purchase a plot of land and then build their own house on it. Until they built their dream home, the family decided to place their storage container in their new plot of land and live in it. Disappearance. On the 8th of October 2009, the Jameson family loaded up their truck and, along with their pet dog Maisie, drove away in the land plot that they were planning to purchase in Red Oak. Unfortunately, this would become the last time they would be seen alive, as it was quite normal for the Jameson to disappear for days together to get away from city life. Their relatives and friends didn't think much about it when they didn't hear from them. Also, as Bobby and Sherilyn had already informed Madison's school that they'd be changing their school as they were moving, no concerns were raised when Madison did not attend her classes. On the 16th of October 2009, two hunters who were walking around the Panola Mountain found a truck on a cleared piece of land. As finding vehicles in this area was uncommon, they walked up to the truck hoping to find its owner, but when they reached it, they noticed that there was no one inside it except an exhausted dog. The windows of the truck were rolled up and its doors were locked. No one was around. The hunters called the police. When the police arrived, they figured out that it was the Jamesons' truck, and the dog inside it was their pet dog, Maisie. With Maisie seemingly passing out, the police broke the window of the truck and rescued her. It appeared as if Maisie had been locked inside of the truck for at least a few days. The police started inspecting the truck. Inside it, they found Bobby's wallet, Sherilyn's purse, their ID cards, their mobile phones, a GPS system, and a bank bag filled with $32,000 in USD cash. Also, they found an 11-page letter that Sherilyn had written to Bobby. The letter was filled with hate and it accused Bobby of being a hermit. The police did an initial search of the area looking for the Jameson family, but as they couldn't find them, they decided to use the previous GPS locations of their mobile phones to get an insight into where they went. The GPS locations revealed that the cell phones had gone up a nearby hill, stayed there for around 15 minutes, and came back down to the truck. Hence, the police walked up the hill in search of the family. But all they could find were Madison's footprints. The footprints of her parents, however, were nowhere to be seen, and this led the police into checking their mobile phones. In one of their phones, the police found a recently taken photograph of Madison. It was taken at the top of a nearby hill. In this photograph, Madison appeared to be extremely unhappy, thus confirming that the family had walked up the hill. The police launched an extensive search with over 400 people volunteering in it. The search was eventually called off. There's no clues about the Jameson family being found. To get a better understanding of their disappearance, the footage of the surveillance system in their house was checked. The footage showed the couple loading their truck just before driving away. However, the couple seemed to be in a trance-like state. They walked multiple times between the house and the truck, and at times they walked from the house to the truck with nothing in their hand, not speaking to each other. They occasionally stopped and stared at something in the distance for a brief period of time. With no new leads to work on, the case became cold, and what happened to the family remains unknown until 3 skeletons were found 4 years later. Discovery. In November of 2013, while 2 hunters were walking in a section of the Panola Mountains, which was almost 5 kilometers away from the area where the Jamesons' truck was found, they found the skeleton remains of 3 bodies lying face down side by side. Seeing that 2 of them belonged to adults and another belonged to a child, it was immediately speculated that this was going to be the Jameson family. Almost 8 months later, the forensic confirmed that the remains indeed belonged to the Jameson family. The cause and time of death, however, couldn't be determined due to the timely decay of the remains. A small hole was found in the back of Bobby's skull, and a few other small holes were found in other bones. Thus, with the reason behind their disappearance and death unknown, what really happened to the Jameson family remains a mystery. Theories. With the actual circumstances shrouded in obscurity, several theories about the family's mysterious death emerged. Lost in the woods. There is a possibility that the family ventured into the nearby forest, got lost inside, and eventually died trying to find their way out. But this is highly unlikely, as during the days in which they apparently went missing, the temperature never dropped below 50 degrees Fahrenheit even at night. Although this area can experience rain, it wasn't that strong. Hence the probability of the family dying because of getting lost in the woods being quite less, but it still could have been possible. Homicide and suicide. Considering the fact that Sherilyn was bipolar and the hate that her 11-page letter in the car carried, there is a possibility that she became euphoric and killed her family before killing herself. However, her friends and relatives claimed that she would never harm her child. Also, considering the fact that the family were planning to settle down in this new piece of land, this possibility is highly unlikely, but still possible. Murder. Bob's relationship with his father was not particularly great. Bobby had, in fact, petitioned a protective order against his father, who had threatened to kill them twice. But when the Jameson family went missing, Bobby's father was actually in the hospital. He died 2 months later. This made him physically and mentally incapable of killing his son and his family. After the bodies of the Jameson family were discovered, one of Sherilyn's friends named Nikki received an anonymous phone call from a woman. She claimed that she used to be part of a white supremacist cult and in their hit list. She remembered seeing the name of the Jameson family. Before she could ask any more questions, the call disconnected and the call couldn't be traced. Also, considering the fact that a satanic Bible was found in the Jamesons' house and the lump sum of money that was found in their truck, there is a possibility that they were lured into a cult and then murdered. Not saying that I'm particularly knowledgeable in these things, but Holes in the bones, you say? I have my opinion. The mystery behind the disappearance of Johnny Ghosh. Born on the 12th of November, 1969, Johnny Ghosh was the only son of John and Noreen Ghosh. His parents took excellent care of him, only to see their worst nightmare unfold 13 years later when Johnny disappeared. He disappeared in unexpected and obscure circumstances. Johnny's case was allegedly involved with prostitution, pedophilia, and human trafficking. Johnny's disappearance. On the 15th of September 1982, 12-year-old Johnny Ghosh left his house in the suburb of West Des Moines at around 5:45 a.m. to deliver the Des Moines Register's Sunday paper. He usually woke his father up before leaving the house to help him with his delivery rounds, but that day, he left the house all alone, with only Gretchen, the house's miniature dachshund, accompanying him. Dressed up in a white sweatshirt with Kim's Academy printed on the back, sweatpants, and blue rubber flip-flops, he took with him a yellow paper bag and a red wagon which he always used to carry the papers. However, Johnny was not able to deliver the papers that day. As a result, at around 7 a.m., his mother Noreen got a call from a neighbor who complained about not receiving her newspaper. Alarmed by this, his father John left the house to investigate. Approximately 2 blocks away, he found Johnny's red wagon with Gretchen and all of the undelivered newspapers in it. John rushed back to the house and, along with Noreen, informed the police. But because of the police policy back then, Johnny could be classified as missing only after 72 hours. Initial investigation. The initial findings of the police was that the young boy had run away from his parents, but his parents strongly objected to it and suggested that Johnny had been kidnapped. However, they were not able to establish a strong motive behind it. Thus, to gather more information, John and Noreen started to do their own investigation. Thankfully, they got quite a few inputs from witnesses who saw him just before his disappearance. On the dreaded September morning in which Johnny disappeared, his fellow paperboys they'd seen him at the paper drop picking up his share of newspapers. Mike, who was one of Johnny's fellow paperboys, saw a blue Ford Fairmount car approach Johnny. The engine of the car turned off and the man driving it opened its door, swinging his feet out onto the platform on which the boys were assembling. He asked Johnny where 86th Street was, but Johnny gave him a completely incoherent answer. He told the man that his papers were loaded in his wagon. "I'm scared, I'm getting out of here, I'm gonna head home," he added. As Johnny started walking away, the car also started to leave. Before driving away, the mysterious man flicked his light thrice. It appeared as if he was giving out a signal as a tall man walked out of the space between 2 buildings, started following Johnny along 42nd Street to Marcourt Lane. At the same time, a man named Smith was woken up by the sound of a car door slamming shut. When he sat up on his bed and peeked through a nearby window, he saw a black and silver car break the stop signal and make a left turn. A couple of other residents saw Johnny talking to a strange-looking man in a blue car whose number plate was from Warren County, Iowa. After Noreen and John gave the police the information that they had gathered, the police began scouring the entire area. They even did a door-to-door canvass of the neighborhood to find clues, but they found nothing. It appeared as if the boy had just vanished, and that's exactly what the police officer in charge of the case told in his pronouncement. With the police not doing much to solve the case, Noreen sought the help of 2 private investigators named Jim and Ted, who followed up with the leads that were never pursued by the police. What they found horrified Noreen. Johnny was supposedly kidnapped to be used in a global pedophile and prostitution ring. In March of 1983, roughly 6 months after Johnny's disappearance, a woman from Oklahoma claimed that she was approached by a young boy in a parking lot of a local store. He kept screaming, "I'm Johnny Ghosh. I've been kidnapped." But before she could do anything, 2 men grabbed him and took him away. They were never seen again. Over the following few years, more evidence was found. The Ghosh received a dollar bill with a handwritten note on it, and it read, "I am alive, Johnny Ghosh." Noreen confirmed that it was indeed her son's handwriting. Also in Denver, "Johnny Ghosh was here" is written on the restroom wall of a public eatery. Whether it was real or not was hard to decide. Another boy goes missing. After the disappearance of another 13-year-old boy named Eugene on the 12th of August 1984, Noreen gained the support of a dairy company in Des Moines. Eugene went missing while he was delivering newspapers on the south side of Des Moines. With the police claiming that the cases had no connection, Noreen claimed that she knew about the abduction a few months before it happened. According to her, a private investigator who was searching for her son told her that the next kidnapping would take place on the second weekend of August, 1984. It would be a paperboy from the south side of Des Moines. After Eugene's disappearance, his relatives, who were working at Anderson and Erickson Dairy, they reached out to the company's president. To help find the boys, he agreed to put their photos and details on the sides of half-gallon milk cans and Dairy Maid. It was later followed by the Prairie Farms Dairy as well. Despite the massive reach it gave, no information about their disappearance was found. A new claim. In 1989, Noreen met a 21-year-old man named Paul, who would also be a victim of the prostitution ring that apparently captured Johnny. He told her that the underage prostitution ring was run by Lawrence E. King, Jr., a prominent Republican Party activist and businessman. He also claimed that the other high-level U.S. politicians were involved in it. According to him, they were a cult of devil worshippers who were involved in the mutilation, sacrifice, and cannibalism of children. Ugh. Paul told Noreen that he had met Johnny while he was stuck in the prostitution den. He told her details about Johnny which were never publicized, and this included a scar on his tongue. However, the FBI and the police didn't consider him as a credible evidence, and they didn't even interview him. Also, separate state and federal grand juries ruled out the prostitution ring as a carefully crafted hoax. But according to Noreen, the claims were dismissed just because of the high-profile names that were involved. I believe that. Noreen claims to have seen Johnny again. In the early hours of March of 1997, 2 young men appeared on the doorstep of Noreen's Iowa apartment. After waking up from sleep because of their knock, she walked toward the main door and peeked through to see who it was. The faces weren't familiar. She asked who it was, and a voice answered, "It's me, Johnny. Can I come in?" She immediately opened the door and let the men in. After entering the house, the young man who claimed to be Johnny opened up his shirt and showed her a unique birthmark on his chest to confirm his identity. Noreen understood that her son had grown into a young man. After a brief conversation with his mother, the young man left. According to Noreen, her son told her that he was indeed kidnapped by the members of a pedophilic crime ring. He had recently escaped from them and was keeping a low profile to avoid getting abducted again. He told her that he was still in great danger and thus would not visit her again. Asking his mother to bring his captors to justice, Johnny apparently left. Later, Noreen went to the FBI and had them create a sketch of her now adult son. But but the lack of evidence to suggest that Johnny was abducted by the member of the pedophilic ring made them question if he was still alive. There is a possibility of Noreen hallucinating or someone playing a prank on a grieving woman, but it's hard to come up with a convincing conclusion. Disturbing photographs. On the 1st of September 2006, Noreen found a mysterious envelope on her doorstep. Inside the envelope were 3 chilling photos. In these photos were 3 young boys who were tied up and gagged. One of these boys resembled Johnny. Believing that the photos were authentic, she took them to the police department. But with a Florida law enforcement officer claimed that he had investigated one of these photos a few years before Johnny's disappearance. All 3 boys in this photograph were identified, and it was determined that they willingly posed for it. Assuming that the other 2 photos were related to this one, the police concluded that it was just a bad prank. Noreen, however, asserted that the boy in the photo was her son himself, but the police never took her seriously. With Noreen still insisting that her son was abducted to satisfy pedophiles and the police continually denying it, what actually happened to Johnny remains a mystery. What a horrible story. All the way around. And I want to know what happens now. Or at least what happened to Noreen. The murder case of the Hammersmith ghost. In the December of 1803, the residents of Hammersmith, a small town located on the northern banks of the River Thames, started facing a ghostly problem. They started reporting petrifying encounters with a phantom that haunted the lanes, churchyards, and fields of the town. With some witnesses describing it as a white-hooded figure and others claiming it to be in the skin of a beast, one concordant thing about the ghostly figure was the terror it inflicted upon its victims. It struck so much terror in the mind of the residents that they tried their best not to go out of their homes after 5 in the evening. Ghost attacks. On the 15th of December 1803, while Thomas Groom, a brewer servant, was walking through St. Paul's churchyard with a fellow servant at around 9 p.m., he encountered this ghostly figure. According to his own account, something came from the tombstone behind him and caught him by the throat. It twisted him around, but he didn't see anything in front of him. He tried pushing it away with a fist, and while doing so, he felt something that resembled a great coat. This incident gave Thomas a terrible fever, from which he would later, This incident gave Thomas a terrible fever, from which he very lately recovered. On the 29th of December 1803, while William Girdler, the private watchman who was appointed by residents of the town, was on his nightly rounds, he reported seeing a tall, whitish figure. When he walked toward it to get a better look, he noticed that it was a person who had covered himself up with a white cloth. Underneath the cloth, he wore a dark coat with metal buttons. William tried nabbing him, but the person fled into the darkness. Even with the dawn of the new year, the attacks of the ghostly figure never stopped. At the beginning of January 1804, the ghost attacked 2 women. With one elderly and the other pregnant, the shock caused by the terrorizing encounter killed them both. One night in the same month, while a driver of a coach was traveling on a remote lane in the town, he started hearing a strange rustling sound. When he looked around to see what was causing the sound, he saw a strange white figure gliding over the nearby meadows parallel to him. As he got closer and closer, he noticed that it had bladders on different parts of its body. Ew. Completely terrified, the driver jumped out of his carriage and ran back to the town, leaving behind his passengers and his horses. When he returned back with over a dozen residents by his side, he found the traces cut in the horses grazing in a nearby field. The murder. Following this event, a clergyman and a resident of the town offered a reward to anybody who could capture this ghost, with half of the residents considering this ghost a real one, and the other half considering it as a man acting as a ghost. Groups of young men armed with guns began roaming the lanes. They were doing this by night to put an end to the troubling ghost. One of these men was a 29-year-old excise officer named Francis Smith. On the 3rd of January, 1804, armed himself up and headed out to hunt for the ghost at around 10:30 p.m. When watchman William met him at the corner of Black Line Lane, Smith told him that he was out in search of the ghost. After the meetup, William continued on his rounds. Smith plunged into the darkness to continue on his hunt. At the same time, a bricklayer named Thomas Millwood was going to his house from his mother's house. He was still clad in his work clothes, which were completely white. Because of his work clothes, he had already been mistaken for the ghost twice, and even this time he was mistaken for a ghost by Smith. Thinking Millwood was the ghost, Smith shot him. With a bullet through his jaw, Millwood met his demise, and his body was taken to the Black Lion Inn. Smith acknowledged the crime he had committed. He turned himself in. Despite Smith claiming that it was an accident and that he only killed Millwood because he resembled a ghost, he was sentenced to death on the 6th of January, 1804, but his sentence was changed just in a few days' time. On the 24th of January, 1804, he was pardoned by the king himself on condition that he severed 1 year in prison. I'm going to go with suffered. The ghostly attacks pause and resume. By the time of Smith's trial, one of the culprits behind the haunting was found. It was discovered that a shoemaker named John Graham had a habit of disguising himself as a ghost. He was a religiously inclined man who was the principal singer in the chapel. This made him the last guy to be suspected as the man behind the haunting. According to Graham, he did it to take revenge on his apprentices after they scared his children by telling him ghost stories. However, Graham was adamant that he went out dressed up as a ghost only once. This was accepted by the community and no further action was taken against him. Following this incident, the ghost stopped appearing and the life of the town started returning to normal. With the fear slowly dissipating, more and more people started venturing to the dark, and the Hammersmith ghost eventually became a distant memory, but the ghost would come back to haunt them 2 decades later. On the 3rd of December 1824, town residents were greeted by a headline, "A new Hammersmith ghost," in their newspapers. In the lanes and roads of the town, a tall white figure started crossing paths with females only to magically disappear later. One night while a girl was returning home after her work in the Angel Public House, a tall white figure appeared in front of her, started chasing her. Poor girl was so scared by this time she was subject to dangerous fits. A few nights later, when a hard-working man was returned home from his work, the ghost jumped on his back, threw him to the ground, and then vanished. The man was left with a broken arm. The ghost attacked its 3rd victim a few days later. This time it was a woman whose clothes were torn to pieces. The woman was found unconscious on the road with multiple deep scratches on her body. On the 15th of February, 1825, the true identity of the ghost was revealed. When the ghost tried attacking a man named Worsley, he got a hold of it. It was revealed that it was not a ghost, but a farmer named John Benjamin who was pulling up the ghostly antics. Scooby-Doo style. After he was caught, the sightings of the ghost stopped. So were all of the ghosts of Hammersmith merely dressed up human beings. The headline of the newspaper published on the 29th of July 1955 says no. Claims of a real ghost. The newspaper article told a story that was not publicized until then. In 1803, a man slit his throat open and died right next to the church. He was buried in the churchyard, and back then it was believed by the locals that it was the ghost of this man that was haunting the town. The person who shared this information with the newspaper claimed that his great-grandmother had seen a tall white figure rise from the tombstone of the man's graveyard. She claimed that it had flaming eyes and it chased her until she fainted. When she woke up, the ghost was already gone. 2 days later, the poor woman died because of fear. The woman's husband, otherwise known as the anonymous person's great-grandfather, apparently saw the ghost on first full moon night in August for the last time. According to the article, the ghost was rumored to appear every 50 years on the first full moon night of August. According to a paranormal investigator named Chris Farman, the claims became true. On the 5th of August, 1955, which was the first full moon night of August, Chris Farman and 17 other paranormal investigators witnessed a white figure rise out of the dead man's tomb in the middle of the night. The figure didn't seem to have legs, and it appeared as if it was hovering over the floor. After drifting around the churchyard for some time, it moved back to its tomb and disappeared. Conclusion. In 2005, the next time the ghost was supposed to appear, several newspapers tried to build up anticipation for the occasion, but it did not catch public attention as it did in 1955. Thus, not much information about the events in 2005 is known, and to confirm if the ghost is true or not, one has to wait until 2055. So, was the Hammersmith haunted by a real ghost or a man dressed up like a ghost? The answer remains a mystery. That's asking for the mystery machine. The Tanaku Exorcism. On the morning of the 15th of June, 2005, a team of paramedics was called to the Holy Trinity Monastery in Tanaku, a small remote village situated amidst the hills and forests of eastern Romania. When they arrived, they saw the lifeless body of a young woman who was dressed up as a nun, laid on an extemporary cross. They were not aware of the fact that the 23-year-old woman had just been through a 3-day-long exorcism led by Father Daniel Petri Corgian, who, with the assistance of 4 nuns of the monastery, had attempted to drive out a demon that he claimed had possessed her. The name of this dead woman was Marisica Irina Kornitsi, and her exorcism turned out to become one of the most publicized and highly debated instances of the exorcism in the 21st century. The exorcism was indeed a terrifying battle for Irina, but having lived through a long string of battles with separation, abuse, and inner demons, it was only her last one. Irina moved into the monastery. Irina was born in 1981 to a poor unmarried couple from Vaslui County in eastern Romania. At only 3 years old, she witnessed her father, a troubled brawler, hang himself from a beam of the house, after which her mother was deemed financially unfit to take care of her and her 2 siblings. Thus, she and her younger brother, Vasil, were left under the care of an extremely corrupt orphanage owned by the state. While growing up, they suffered unspeakable abuse at the hands of those entrusted to be their caregivers, but this, by all accounts, did not hinder Irina's physical and psychological development. Similar to most of the other girls raised in the Romanian orphanages at the time, she was tough, hard-working, and wary of men. She took self-defense classes at a young age, developed a passion for karate, which she often used to protect her friends. Also, she spoke with a deep, intimidating voice and only felt comfortable dressed in sportswear. Her limited education gave her limited options, so she sought employment when she was 19 years old. She worked as a nanny in Germany. While away from her hometown, Irina was in close touch with her brother and her best friend from the orphanage, Paraskeva. Wanting to escape her turbulent past, Paraskeva joined the Order of the Holy Trinity Monastery in Tanaku in 2003. In her letters to Irina, she wrote about Father Daniel Petre-Korgian, the abbot of the monastery, whom she claimed was a great man. She said that she felt relieved after confessing her sins to him, promising that it would give her the peace and relief that she'd always desired. She invited Irina to the monastery for confession and Holy Communion. Thus, at the beginning of April of 2005, Irina and her brother visited Sister Paraskeva with the plans of returning to Germany in June of the same year. For Father Korgian, their visit was a blessing. With the abbey still under construction, he started counting on their help at the monastery. Story of Father Korgian. Before becoming a priest, Father Korgian was pursuing religious studies at the University of Lasai. I'm going with Lasai. While he was still studying, he was recruited by businessmen from his hometown from the building of the Holy Trinity Monastery, or rather, for building. The construction commenced in the year of 2000, the same year in which Father Korgian was hastily ordained by the local bishop before finishing his religious studies. This raised a lot of eyebrows, as according to the laws of the Orthodox Church, one has to be a graduate of religious studies before ordination. Unlike the Catholic Church, exorcisms in the Orthodox Church can be performed without seeking approval from the higher ranks. Thus, with the decision left to their own discretion, exorcisms were quite common in eastern Romania. They were performed by bishops and priests. Although the Orthodox Church frowned upon public exorcisms, they were habitually performed by priests during service. The priests who performed them were often regarded as religious celebrities. Inspired by these priests, Father Korgian, who was given the right to exorcism along with his ordination, started performing his own devil-banishing services at the monastery. In 2003, Father Korgian ran into a problem with the diocese, because the county bishop constantly refused to bless the church and the monastery, and the conventional iconography was not pointed on its walls. Painted. Considering the blessing of the bishops only a formality, he continued to hold his service inside the church for his parishioners, the nuns who were devout to him, and now his new guests, Irina and her brother. Backstory. Irina was elated to be reunited with her best friend, spent the following days attending service, doing chores and reminiscing. Allured by the secure and peaceful life the monastery provided, Irina slowly started to consider staying there, but little did she know it was only calm before the storm. Pressured by Sister Paraskeva, Irina decided to confess her sins on the 8th of April. Having a rough idea about the trauma the young woman had been through, Father Korgian helped her ease into the confession by asking her up first about her life in Germany. After exhausting this topic, Irina is said to have become distressed. She started retreating. Seeing her lost in her own thoughts, Father Korgian advised her to leave Germany and settle somewhere close to the monastery. After asking her a few more questions, he gave her his blessing and penance, which she promised to complete before her Holy Communion, which was scheduled for the next day. So, the next morning she joined the sisters at Mass to receive her Holy Communion. Dressed up in a skirt and blouse with a scarf covering her head, she felt extremely uncomfortable abandoning her usual clothes, but if the excitement of receiving her Holy Communion overshadowed it. After the communion, she felt that something had allegedly changed inside of her. She felt light as she walked gently around the monastery, humming a song to herself, which, according to her own account, filled her being. Later that evening, the nuns of the monastery started beating the I was startled by that. Started beating the cementrum before the beginning of the evening prayers, and its rhythm pulled Irina toward the church. This seemed to be a mystifying experience for the young woman, but soon turned into an unsettling one as she suddenly started feeling a sense of dread within her. Just before she almost entered the church, she started feeling increasingly uncomfortable with the skirt that she was wearing, so she turned around and started walking back to change into her regular attire. On her way, she stopped by some of the nuns who needed her help, but she yelled at them uncharacteristically and continued walking back. She was again stopped by Sister Nicoletta, the Mother Superior, who attempted to appease her, but she continued to walk away mumbling to herself. When Sister Nicoletta turned her attention away from her, Irina snuck behind her back and started making rude remarks and obscene gestures. Dumbfounded by her actions, Sister Nicoletta summoned Sister Parskeva, which made Irina flee. After the evening prayers concluded, she returned to the church entrance dressed in jeans and started hopping behind the sisters, mimicking their walks and yelling profanities at them. According to Sister Parskeva, she looked nothing like her original self, and every time she heard the name of Jesus, she reacted badly. Upon seeing her behavior, Father Korgin concluded that she must have kept something from him during confection, which had thus compromised her Holy Communion. So, concerned for his penitent, he asked Sister Parskeva to bring Irina with him for second confession. What followed was a rather unconventional confession. That's where Sister Parskeva confessed Irina's sins instead of her. As Parskeva revealed the concealed and traumatic past of Irina's life, she started mimicking her and nodding dramatically. Father Korgin hoped that his penitent's condition would improve after the second confession, but right after the confession, Irina dropped to the ground and began squirming, one moment yelling that she wanted to leave the abbey, while the very next moment pleading with the nuns to let her stay. She started growing extremely reckless and started hurting herself. Shocked by what they were seeing, Father Korgin and Sister Nicoletta called for an ambulance, but as they didn't get a proper response, they tied her up with a rope and drove her to the Vaslui County Hospital. Irina was diagnosed with delusional hallucinatory flush, exhibiting psychomotor agitation and onset of major psychosis. She was later transferred to the psychiatric ward where, due to her violent outbursts, she had to be restrained, kept under medicated sleep. There, Irina was diagnosed with disorganized schizophrenia, which, by all accounts, was a diagnosis meant only to facilitate the prescription of antipsychotic medication. Within 4 days on such medication, her health worsened, and she was once again transferred to the intensive care unit. 12 days later, after it was concluded that she had recovered, Irina was released into the care of the Holy Trinity Monastery. During her time at the psychiatric ward, Irina often complained of hearing demonic voices. She was never taken seriously, and these voices never stopped, despite the hospital claiming that she had recovered. While Sister Nicoletta was supervising her in the monastery, she is said to have witnessed her screaming, singing, and rocking back and forth at the edge of her bed while staring at the empty wall in front of her. According to her, Irina was demonically possessed, and she felt the shivers of hell in her presence. The Exorcism. Soon, Irina made her third confession to Father Korgin, and this time it appeared to have worked. She was back to her original self, and Father Korgin and the nuns of the monastery were happy about it. Inspired by her progress, Father Korgin told Irina that they could continue taking care of her at the monastery. But that they would need more resources for her medication and accommodation for which he asked her for. So he asked her to yield her savings to the church. She ended up doing it only to be filled with distress later. With a huge portion of her savings gone, her tantrums returned. She started cursing the nuns of the monastery, threatened to hurt them with her karate moves. With the situation worsening and her becoming more and more violent, Father Corgine pinned her down, tied her up, gagged her mouth with a towel, confined her to her room. While being confined to her room for 2 full days, Irina started screaming and yelling in fear, claiming that the devil had come to take her. It was at this point Father Corgine decided to exorcise her. So, the nuns made an extemporary cross, chained Irina to it, taped her mouth, and took her into the church to begin exorcism. According to Sister Nicoletta, they hadn't chained her to the cross. They could have killed herself or somebody else. Also, one of the other sisters who were involved claimed that Irina knew that she was possessed, and she herself asked them to tie her up and help her. During the ritual, Father Corgine tried to give her holy water and blessed bread. She refused to take them. This further enforced his belief that she was indeed possessed by the devil. After hours of relentless struggle not seeming to work, Irina was carried to the enclosed veranda of the church, placed on a quilt, but she was still tied to the cross. The entire event repeated for 2 more nights, and then 2 more days. That was before she was finally untied from the cross. On the morning of the 15th of June, after Father Corgine claimed that she was cured, Irina was untied from the cross after 3 long days. She was too weak to even stand on her own feet. Her mouth was severely wounded and she appeared to be completely dehydrated. The nuns tried to feed her bread soaked in warm tea, but she soon became unresponsive. With her body barely breathing and her pulse fast dropping, the paramedics were called. Before they arrived, the nuns prepared Irina for the hospital as they washed her body and dressed her like a nun. The whole time, Irina was simply limp and quiet. When the paramedics finally arrived 30 minutes later and checked Irina, they concluded that she must have died a few hours prior to their arrival. But Father Corrigine and the nuns refused this. They claimed that they had been giving her tea and bread only an hour before. Overwhelmed by the situation, the paramedics drove Irina to the hospital, and on their way, they attempted resuscitation by injecting her with adrenaline every few minutes. When they reached the hospital, it was concluded that the girl had already died. The doctor who examined her said that the young woman looked like a 6-year-old woman because of her injuries and intense dehydration. The authorities were informed about Irina's death, and a criminal investigation commenced. Aftermath. Father Corrigine and the 4 nuns who helped him, Nicoletta, Adina, Elena, and Simona, were charged with murder. Although they strongly claimed that Irina had died because of an overdose of adrenaline which was injected into her on the way to the hospital, Father Corrigine was initially charged with aggravated murder and sentenced to 14 years in prison, while the 4 nuns were sentenced to between 5 and 8 years. But upon appeal, Father Corrigine's sentence was later reduced to 7 years. He was defrocked by the Romanian Orthodox Church, and the 4 nuns were relieved of their duties. While some believed that Irina was suffering from mental illness, others, including Irina's brother, still insist that Irina was possessed by the devil, and that Father Corrigine was trying his best to save her. So, was Irina's final battle against the devil or a mental illness, or a combination of both? I leave it to your own judgment. And I leave you guys to tomorrow. See ya.